Over the past few years, I have consistently spoken with Dr. Shankara Shetty. And even though, interestingly, in these 4 years of interacting with him on multiple occasions, multiple levels, even when we were part of an international organization, we still haven't even met face to face. But I have been so fascinated with his journey that I'm always happy to talk to him. And critically, his insights clinically are usually quite remarkable. And as I have often said, when we go back in time, when history looks back at the pandemic, we're going to find out that what he had seen with regards to how he saved the lives of all of the patients that he came across in semi rural South Africa was literally an act of genius. And how will the medical and scientific community justify that instead of listening to him and working out what it is that he did, they took him to court? Can you believe that? Trying to delicense probably one of the heroes of the pandemic, going to face it on his own, finding a solution, saving the lives of his patients. And just because he said something about whether or not a certain injectable should be used, he ends up going to face court. Well, without any further ado, let's bring in Shankara. Shankara, as usual, great to have you here to update us as to what in the world is going on. What's the latest with regards to this unbelievable court case against you in South Africa?
Uh, Philip, it had its twists and turns. Uh, the charges brought against me range from everything from the pathophysiology my understanding of COVID, which the complainant feels is bogus science. It ranges from that to my treatment, to my speaking out against the vaccines and the possible harms it may cause, to the nefarious agenda behind it and the intent behind the vaccine. My work with COVID, Philip, brought into sharp focus in the first and second wave, that the pathology we were seeing and the mortality and morbidity was more about a pathogenic protein than a virus itself. And so, recognizing spike protein as the primary pathogen, uh, it made the vaccine, it shone the vaccine in a very poor light. We were injecting the most pathogenic part of the virus into people to stimulate an immune response. That's not what we do when we try and stimulate immunity. And so that got me into a lot of hot water. Understanding that the vaccine would be dangerous, I couldn't understand why we were rushing it to market, seeing that there were effective treatments. In 2021, early 21, when the mandates came out, that's when I decided I needed to speak out that there's an agenda, that this is more than just a virus, that a natural virus. I knew that there was a lab leak. I knew that there was manipulation to the virus itself. As to the intent, the mandate cemented my view on this being a nefarious intent, and I stated that. My case intends to prove that, Philip. I have some of the best witnesses around the world, people that I've worked with over time, and they've all come together, like I've said before, as my guardian angels, all doing it pro bono, to defend me in court. And I think the prosecution is shocked by what I'm going to present, and so will find every means possible to postpone my case. To ensure that we don't have legal issues, I accepted an illegally formed charge sheet on the basis that if I accept it, then we don't have any legal wrangling. And at our next meeting, the prosecution will be then forced to present their case against me. So if they're not going to open, if they don't want me to open this can of worms, I'm going to force them to open the can of worms. And so I think they've seen my testimonies, they've seen the evidence I'm going to present, and I don't think that the complainant now wishes to take the stand and be questioned about the evidence that I have in my quarter. They were well aware that this is a public hearing. It was postponed for medical reasons. One of the committee members fell ill. But subsequently, the complainant is now refusing to allow my witnesses to testify virtually. He expects that I fly them down to testify in person, so that I think he can just postpone it again and create financial ruin for me. But I understand his opportunism when it comes to such legal matters, and we're hoping to fight that before we get to court. It's been set down for the 23rd of June, 23rd to the 27th of June this year. Hopefully, by that date, they sort out all the legal issues around public broadcasting and my witnesses testifying virtually. And once that's done, I hope we get to share the evidence we have with the world. I think that's holding us back in treating patients.
You know, one of the fascinating things here, Shankar, is that you are taking the hit on this to force this information into the public arena. Because one of the people who is going to be testifying, producing evidence on your behalf, which I've got some clips of, is Charles Rixey. And could you just make people aware as to exactly who Charles is and why the information that he has is so very important?
Philip Charles is a CBRN specialist working with the US military. Now, CBRN is a chemical, biologic, radiation, and nuclear weapon specialist. He has years of experience in that field. And what transpired was that I think during the first Trump presidency, a team was put together called Drastic that was tasked with looking for the origins of SARS-CoV-2, and a team of experts. What they did was they looked at all the research done on coronaviruses over the past 2 decades. And what they found was that as much as the research was done in different centers around the world and at different times, a lot of it followed the handbook of developing a bioweapon to the T, and that seemed very unusual. So Charles's testimony aims to prove that this was bioweapon design from the start, which SARS-CoV-2 is an unnatural construct that was 20 years in the making, and all the things done to it and over that 20 years had a nefarious agenda. It was not done for the betterment of science or looking to the future to protect humanity. It had more a nefarious agenda.
So it raises the point, and this is part of the reason why I think this testimony and this case is so very important, is that I think that the medical and the scientific community is continuing to treat this virus like another flu. Even though they said at the beginning this was just not another flu, they're now kind of treating it like another flu. This is just another virus. It's no big deal that it's circulating. It's just endemic. Even though the data is coming out that people who get infected before they get to hospital, within 30 days, it's a 12% mortality. They are finding that people, after they get infected, have recurrent bacterial, viral, and fungal infections. Mortality is rising across the world. So everything about this virus is indicating that no matter how mild the symptoms may appear to be, this is a beast. So the medical and scientific community are taking the lead from technically the same people who took them down a path that was clearly not going to help them. How are you hoping that this information will shock them into some kind of response?
I think, Philip, the understanding of how the virus causes the mortality and morbidity was very poorly understood by the general medical fraternity. This is not just another virus. And I think the sentinel finding in my work was that this is an immune mediated condition rather than a viral pathology, as we tend to know viral pathologies. So, being an immune mediated condition, immunity has many different factors that come into play and that influence a person's immunity. It's genetics, genetic predisposition. So genetics will range from your ethnicity to your blood group to all those different genetic factors that will influence how you will respond immunologically to the environment around you. But it also has bearing on your childhood exposures and how well your immunity was developed as a child to tolerate your environment. So those with better tolerance to their environments won't be as affected as those that haven't developed tolerance. I made a comment: children that play in the mud tend to grow up to be stronger adults. That's the reason. The reason being they're exposed to a greater diversity of uh, allergens in their environment and learn to ignore them. But as an adult, when you're exposed to an allergen, you have a different immune response than a child. You don't tolerate it. You try and reconstitute your immune system to not let it offend you. So, in general, what we're seeing, Philip, is that in certain patients, the exposure to spike protein causes an immune reaction, which causes an immune reconstitution. There's a syndrome, Philip, that we look at in TB patients, HIV and TB patients, called IRIS. It's an immune reconstitution inflammatory syndrome. Now, what happens in those patients is where when the immunity comes into contact with an allergen and it can't cope with that allergen, it reconstitutes itself to just put it aside. Now, we've seen the IgG4, we've seen the tolerance issues. Now, more and more science is coming out to show that that kind of adult immune tolerance is the reason we see diseases like cancers and things later on in life. It's simply because the immunity has shifted away from being balanced, the balance that was struck in your environment as a child. Now, if we look at the world today, a lot of the problems we see might be because of people having childhood immune tolerances, but being exposed to different things as adults because we travel the world, we live in different environments from where we were born. And so, as adults, we've got to learn to tolerate our environment, and that reconstitutes our immunity. That reconstitution can be mild, it can be severe, it can be quick, it can be long term. It's just dependent on the individual itself. Now, with the new circulating viruses we're seeing that pattern. Some people have a very severe immediate response. Some people have a long, prolonged response that will manifest later. And some just don't have a response at all. And that's with the
Yeah,
virus, not even considering the vaccine.
I think one of the big concerns I have, and I keep on shouting it from the rooftop, is that the virus is still circulating.
Yep.
Now, people keep on putting that aside and saying, well, disease is mild, ICUs are not full, and so therefore it's okay. It doesn't matter that population morbidity, sickness is rising rapidly, and mortality, excess deaths continues to remain elevated, 4 or 5 years afterwards. Even the insurance industry is making the point. But without a concerted effort to understand what's going on and the mechanisms, a lot of people are going to suffer the consequences. And the reality is that, in a sense, it doesn't even matter if the public understands this, because at the end of the day, when they get sick, if the doctors don't know what's going on, there's nothing they can do.
Exactly, Philip. Exactly. And that's the reason behind my eagerness to have my case come to closure so that I can divulge this information to the public, make sure that the mainstream medical community is aligned with it and understands it. I've only got two hands, I can't treat everyone. So I need all hands on deck to understand the problem we face and the possibilities or solutions that we might need to find in the future. And that's the big issue. Uh, I'm a case in point, Philip. I'm unvaccinated. I've never had the first three variants. I've had Omicron, I think, 5 times already. The first 2 times, I recovered from the viral phase. On the eighth day, I had a symptom that I should have taken more. Paid more attention to. On the ninth day, I had microvascular clotting, which saw me in ICU. I managed to negate that with quick heparin and quickly onto rivaroxaban. From the second occasion, I decided to stay on rivaroxaban because the onset of the clotting was so sudden. I couldn't predict it. And we're not doing testing for COVID anymore, so I wouldn't know if the flu that I'd picked up was a COVID infection. Now, being on an anticoagulant constantly, I've negated what happens on the eighth day. the microvascular clots. But how I know I've had an infection of COVID subsequently is that by the 10th or 11th day, I get joint aches and pains that show an immune response. And I have to go onto a steroid to suppress that. So, each person's going to respond very uniquely to the virus itself, depending on their immune constitution. And of course, each person better recognize it the next time it happens. In my case, it is life-threatening, and so I have to be very vigilant of it. In other people, it'll cause a very mild immune reconstitution that might take years to manifest. But if you understand how you respond to it, you will recognize it every time it happens. So I think it's down to each person recognizing it and being able to convey that to their medical practitioner, that they think they're having an immune response. And because Philip, when I went to hospital itself, the specialists there in the hospital were completely confused.
You know, when I think about it, because it's all around us, and when I think about my response, and for the people listening, this is important to note. What I tend to notice whenever I think I've been exposed is that I get a slight backache that's just there all the time. Doesn't go away. It doesn't stop me from doing anything, but like if you're sitting down, you can feel it. Oftentimes I can get vertigo, because for me vertigo is something I've always had. So if I have exposure, I find that that tends to get a little bit more noticeable. And sometimes it can be just very, very mild fatigue. Luckily for me, it's usually quite transient, just maybe a day, and then I'm fine. But it just highlights the point, as you said, that when I notice it, I trigger automatically a few things that I do, because I think, okay, have I just had an exposure? How do I mitigate it? How do I, make sure that I minimize the amount of virus that breaks through my mucosal immunity? That's technically all I'm doing. And so for everybody, they have to do this. I plan to do a presentation on the sunburn and skin. People need to know if they're dark skinned or if they're very fair skinned in terms of sun exposure. So, you don't do the same sun exposure if you have red hair compared to someone who has very dark skin, because they have different levels of protection. And so, in the same way, everybody needs to be aware of their immune threshold and what it is that needs to be done in the context of when they start to feel any symptoms. I don't underestimate anything, because I know how significant this is. Now I'm going to play a clip from Charles, just so this is the reason I take it seriously, because as far as I'm concerned, I can't find a natural source for it. And so therefore, if it's a lab source, you have to presume it was designed in such a way to cause maximum harm. Here is Charles adding some thoughts to what we have to say. Let me just add this in here.
To discuss what gain of function actually means. Now, there's been a lot of debate about the definition. However, there is an actual U.S. government definition for the types of experiments that gain of function concerns. In this case, this includes experiments that lead to enhanced harmful consequences of pathogens or toxins, disrupts immunity or the effectiveness of an immunization against the agent or toxin, experiments that confer to agents or toxins resistance to prophylactics or methodologies, increases stability, transmissibility, or the ability to disseminate an agent or toxin. And then, most importantly for our purposes, alters the host range or tropism of the agent or toxin, meaning it allows a pathogen, a virus in this instance, to be able to infect a broader range of human cells. Now, keeping those in mind, I went through those 7 categories and how they relate to SARS-CoV-2. And as you can see here, all 7 of the categories that are listed as official gain-of-function experiments are either directly or indirectly fulfilled by SARS-CoV-2, the virus itself, or our response to the virus.
Very important. That is incredible information. As you said, they were tasked at the time by the Trump administration in 2020 to take a look at this. And essentially every single one of the characteristics they found hit. And by the way, in case anybody is noticing the language, that this was presented to the Slovakian government, wasn't it?
Yes, testimony to the Slovakian government.
And so this is pretty serious stuff. And this is why I'm saying is that this is a big boy conversation we're having here, Shankara, because a lot of people are still pretty naive about what can happen, and they just don't believe this kind of thing could ever happen. Now, I don't know how to help people, especially clinicians, in that context. And for me, the best example is the case that happened in the UK, where I think it was Litvinenko, a Russian dissident. He was poisoned with radioactive substances. Now, I could never figure out how the hospital knew that he was given radioactive substances. I think it may have been a family member who told them, because he just came in sick, vomiting. He still died. But they at least knew to wear radioactive protection when around him. That's the kind of understanding you have to have when you're dealing with something that is just outside of the normal characteristics that you would normally face. And how do you get clinicians to take this kind of stuff seriously?
I think, Philip, it's the information. We've seen a lot of the censorship that has prevented, usually when you have this happen, Philip, you'd have people come together from all different walks of life that are interested in understanding what's going on, giving different views, having discussions and debates, and providing evidence. And whoever's explanation stands the test of logic, reason, questioning, will be the most likely outcome. Now, once you have censorship, suppression, all that kind of thing that's gone on in the pandemic, you have everyone just pushed into one direction, into one train of thought. And that's what's happened. And it's hard now to break that train of thought, to break that ideology that's been set, when you get a fact that changes the foundation of where all this was built on. And this is, so if you look at what Charles is bringing in his testimony, this was a man-made virus. So what we're dealing with is a man-made pandemic. So when you look at all the governmental, global organizations that are tasked with protecting us, from the United Nations to the World Health Organization to our local government authorities, there's been this talk about pandemic preparedness for the past 4 years. The World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty, the money that needs to be put into it, our civil liberties that need to be curbed in the event of another pandemic. So there's all this preparation for the next pandemic. My question is, who's the man preparing the next pandemic if this one was man-made? And that's the question that needs to be answered. So it turns the entire narrative on its head. So it's gone that deep that, it's pervasive. It's invaded every facet of society itself. And to turn that around, I think a little bit of shock treatment is necessary. And I think that's what the testimony of Charles and other people in my case need to bring out. Yes, we get over the shock and we get back down to business again and start to save lives. That's what we need to do, and direct research in the appropriate manner. Not just cherry pick what we think fits our narrative and ignore the rest. That's what's been happening.
It is such a serious situation, Shankara, because at the moment, the public health system across the world is largely silent on the circulation. And I keep on observing people saying, there wasn't even a pandemic. This was nothing. This was made up. People didn't die. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, when this tsunami hits and the way it's going to hit, I've been trying to find an image to describe it. Here is the image that I think is where we are. Imagine being on a beach in the northern hemisphere. This tends not to happen, say, for instance, in close to the equator. When the water pulls way out and you have like a quarter of a mile of beach where you can walk from where the water is at the shore when the tide is high, and you can walk, 500, 600 meters out towards the sea where you finally hit the edge of the water. Where the world is now is they have walked all the way out to reach the water. They're playing in the sea, and they don't realize that the tide is now going to start coming in. And before you know it, the water has caught beyond you and you can't get out. That's the image I feel at the moment as to where we are. We just don't even grasp that the tide is going to rush back in, and it's not going to be a big wave. It's just that the water just keeps on coming and you can't outrun it. Am I right?
Yeah, I think you are, Philip. I think where we've gone wrong in that scenario is that in an attempt to save lives as clinicians, we've heard all these different stories over the past 5 years. Now, you cannot go wrong if you anticipate the worst. I can't understand why everyone's anticipating the best and refuses to anticipate the worst. We can't make a mistake. So why aren't we anticipating the worst and preparing for the worst, and we'll never go wrong? That's where the mistakes lie. So that's what I've done from the beginning. I anticipated the worst, and then I used the narrative, the government strategies to justify why I think it's the worst that's happening. Well, today I've been proven to be true, and I've not had a patient demise, but I need the world to hear this. I need the clinical or the physicians around the world to hear this. And I think, Philip, with the diversity with which this virus influences our human physiology, allopathic medicine is not, and I said this in one of the interviews we had very early on, that allopathic medicine is far too targeted to deal with the range of issues that this single pathogen is going to cause in the human body. And so allopathy is going to have to swallow its arrogance and start to embrace all the other medical interventions that are available out there, all the traditional medicines, or what the Rockefellers called alternate treatments. And they are now going to become the mainstream.
You've said something there, Shankara, that I think in case we have clinicians, people who are in the health professions watching this, essentially what we're doing now is that we have the patient, they're short of breath, they have a cough, they are coughing up some blood, and they have a swollen leg. And we are saying, this could just be a chest infection. Maybe they just have a minor virus.
Yeah.
Instead of the clinical practice says, we anticipate the worst outcome, which would be something like a pulmonary embolus. We would then put them on anticoagulation and prove that it isn't before we do anything different. We are doing the complete opposite now, where even though people don't understand what's going on, they are just going, well, let's hope for the best. Everything will be okay. That is not clinical medicine. I don't know what that is, but that is not how clinical medicine works.
Yeah, true. It's happening. It's happening all around the majority of the medical fraternity. I think as well, Philip, the medical fraternity, it's been indoctrinated over years. We can't get away from that fact. When you go to medical school, they teach you certain things. We learn to follow instructions. We must follow protocols. We're not allowed lateral thinking and out of the box thinking. So a lot of the medical fraternity has been indoctrinated in that way. And a lot of the medical fraternity doesn't understand research and science and what is ethical science and where this information comes from. Is it ethically derived? Is it cherry picked? They don't look at, I mean, if you have a pharmaceutical rep that comes and highlights the latest research to you done by that pharmaceutical company. So doctors are not taught to look holistically and broadly at all the information in front of them and make up their own views and minds about what actually is going on. So we got a big problem. It's going to have to be an admission of ignorance, which is
Yeah.
very difficult in a medical fraternity run with egos.
Well, here is what I shared just today on LinkedIn. This is the wastewater in the US, and they're showing the peaks. This is going from 2020. You know, this was when we shut down the world down here. This is where we are since January of 2025. You know, this is for anybody to think this is over. It's just, I don't know. It's certainly not science. It is certainly faith, not science, you know, because the reality of what is happening now is pretty serious. And I'm gonna play another clip from Charles, just so people understand what he's saying with regards to another characteristic of this virus that makes it so very dangerous. Listen to what he had to say here.
Bioweapons, a select group of expert NATO scientists and former military CBRN personnel in 2022 looked at the SARS-CoV-2 virus in the context of what a potential of categories or different means or attributes you would want inside a biological weapon. The same group in 2018 had published a study where they went through 33 known or potential bioweapons candidates, a variety of bacteria, toxins, viruses, rickettsia, etc. And they ranked them according to 12 different criteria. And when you put all these together, they put them in order, and they ranked the most attractive pathogens for use as biological weapons. And in 2022, they did the same using the same criteria with SARS-CoV-2. And what they discovered is that SARS-CoV-2, when compared to all of those other known or potential bioweapons, would rank as the fourth most attractive bioweapon potential. And as I should note that the only virus that ranks above it is the smallpox virus.
That is scary stuff, Shankara. Literally, only smallpox would be considered a better bioweapon than SARS-CoV-2 because of its transmissibility, the silence of its spread. And this leads us into an important point. Now, the more you dig about this virus, the more worrying it gets. That's the reality. And some people don't like to hear it, which is why I said, listen, if you can't handle this kind of conversation, please just don't listen to it. You know, do whatever you want to do and don't worry about it and hope for the best. But if you're going to listen to this kind of conversation, you have to consider the implications of what it's talking about. So here we have a virus that currently is so mild that most people have no idea if they've been infected. Yet we know because of the ORF, the open reading frame proteins in this virus, that once it gets inside the body and starts to replicate and starts to produce these unusual proteins that we have never really seen in any other virus, it does multiple strategies, suppresses interferon, knocks out mitochondria, makes amyloid, causes clotting, and all of this is happening silently.
Yep. It stimulates staphylococcal enterotoxin B, the most antigenic substance on the planet. It prevents autophagy, prevents other cells finding virus-infected cells and destroying them. So it's all been designed to make the virus perpetuate itself and be as toxic as it can.
And the more
no other coronavirus has these attributes.
Yes, and I think the most recent thing that I've been talking about is some of the epigenetic changes that I came across, and they just published it about a week and a half ago. And it was so important that I've zoned in on this, because I think that this is probably the answer for severe COVID and long COVID. And I think this is the holy grail. What they've found is that both the virus and the vaccine causes macrophages, one type of immune cell for the audience, to keep the parts of the DNA that produce inflammatory responses open. So it literally keeps it open all the time. And this then drives all kinds of inflammation. Now, the way how the paper positioned it is they said it was great news, because they said that, it meant that the macrophages are now prepared and ready for the next virus to come along. And I'm thinking to myself, this is not good. This is not a good thing, where your immune system is in this switched on position all the time.
Yeah. That's what I was talking about, Philip. When immune reconstitution happens, it creates inflammation. Now, that kind of what we're seeing with Omicron, that kind of immune reconstitution is a dangerous thing. In different people, it will be dependent. The severity will be dependent on the immune response, which is dependent on their genetic makeup, predispositions, childhood immune exposures, a myriad of different things. In my case, when I have the reaction, I'm trying to stop my immunity from reconstituting itself. Now, patients can have a mild infection, have very mild, long, lingering symptoms that will trigger a permanent immune reconstitution. Those patients might not have any illness or notable illness right now, just feel unwell, but give it a few years, that immune reconstitution will manifest in different ways. Autoimmunity, cancers showing up, lack of immunity to infections, opportunistic infections, that kind of thing. That kind of immune reconstitution and its sequelae have a variable time frame. In some, it can occur very quickly. In others, it would take a long time to manifest. And so, we can't talk of the amount of hospitalizations we're getting from acute COVID right now. There's many to come in the future. Patients with dementia, it comes on very slowly. Alzheimer's, Parkinsonism, and they tend to get hospitalized in the very late stages of the illness. Would anyone ever realize that it was a COVID infection that triggered it in the first place? And that's
Absolutely. So all right, so let's get into the big boy part of the conversation. We don't necessarily have too long to go. So to the audience, if you can't handle this, please step away now, because now we're going to kind of just think. Okay, Shankara, I give you this virus to make, and you have the ability to put anything you want in it. Okay. Is there anything else that you would do if I imagine you were in that lab fiddling around with it? Is there anything else that they could have left out, or that we haven't thought of yet, that could be something to be concerned about?
I think the one thing, Philip, every bioweapon will have an antidote. I wouldn't design a gun that will kill me, right? So I have to design an antidote, and we haven't seen an antidote with this virus or the vaccine itself. But I'm absolutely sure that it was designed to influence immunology, our immune responses. So I think the antidote lies in our immunity. So I've been pushing from the start, saying that we should be testing blood groups, we should be testing the genetics, ethnicities, to see who's more predisposed to spike protein than others. I think Robert Kennedy Jr. was hurled over the coals for saying that Ashkenazi Jews and the Chinese were least affected by spike protein. They found an ethnic difference in the way people responded to spike protein. But that is the facts. And I think whoever designed the virus designed it such that it would not influence certain genetic makeups. So whether it's blood groups or whether it's certain ethnicities, there's variance in that. And understanding that variance will give us an understanding of how we can figure an antidote to it.
Well, here is a question that I'm still trying to get my head around. How much of this was designed versus a cock-up? Meaning that, because there's only so much you can design, and then when you test it, it does something different from what you expected it to do. My best example of that is that when I put on that mind of thinking, okay, well, if you're going to cause a problem, my best example of it is Omicron. Omicron literally appeared out of nowhere. It hit, which African country did it hit again? It was before South Africa. It was there was another country that it hit. Can't remember which one at the moment. But it came out of the blue, and it was the most transmissible. So based on what had happened before, because Africa wasn't vaccinated largely, only 2% of the vaccines had hit Africa. If it was meant to be lethal, it would have wiped out Africa. Okay? Instead, because they didn't have a vaccine, they all got natural immunity. That, if it was designed, had to be a cock-up. That's my view. That could never have been planned. Any thoughts on that?
But Philip, from what I see in my community, which is a broad, diverse community, ethnically and socioeconomically, there are a cohort of people that don't develop immunity to Omicron. I've been getting repeated infections myself. Yet I never had the first three variants. I seem to have immunity to those. So I think because it triggers an immune response, and they've put out a more contagious variant that can evade your immune responses, you'll get repeated infections. That's what we're seeing around the world. Now, when I look at it as, is this a cock-up or is this pre-planned? If you look at the timeline in what happened, we had the first three variants that were very quickly lethal in those where it triggered an immune response. Other people had no response at all, immune response. So there were that fraction that was saying, nah, COVID's just a flu, but there were people dying. And that created the fear because the medical fraternity couldn't figure out why certain people were dying from something in others that was just an ordinary flu. When they had enough fear, that was enough to sell a vaccine or create a false savior. So I think our faith was misplaced. Now we know that the vaccine was rushed to market. We know that it wasn't tested for safety or transmissibility, ability to stop infection and transmission, no safety testing involved. And we tried to bring the world's attention to this. And of course, we were censored. Now we're seeing the vaccine injuries. And so it's coming to the fore that vaccine wasn't that a great idea. But everyone is now distracted by the vaccine and the vaccine injuries and trying to prove it, and no one wants to look at it. But the agenda was always there. So no one looks at Omicron. And that might have been the agenda from the start. Bring out a far more contagious variant that repeatedly infects the population, that will have long-term slow mortality and morbidity. But nobody will look at it and recognize it because we'll be too distracted with what they've done to us, not realizing that Omicron's out there circulating and it's a slow burn.
Yeah, so the way how it presents now, from a clinical point of view, I look for it, meaning that if you don't actively search for it, you'll not see it. Meaning the patient just comes in unwell, but you have to dig back sometimes 2 or 3 weeks before for when they said, yeah, I did feel unwell. I had a bit of fatigue. My usual trick question is, did you do a test? And they go, yes, but it was negative. I said, once you think it was COVID, it was. So, and so it really is very subtle at the moment. And so a lot of the population doesn't even know that they're getting exposed and re-exposed. And part of the education has to be, just as you said, patients need to be aware of their patterns.
Yes.
They need to know that, okay, that was an exposure. I was, around this person who was coughing and hacking for, that was 4 days ago. Now I feel a bit fatigued. Okay, that's an exposure point. And then they need to know what to do with that exposure knowledge. But many people are just not thinking about it.
I think, Philip, it's us as clinicians who are supposed to be educating the public as to these patterns. When it comes to my patients, a few simple things that I bring to their attention. They've had the flu all their lives, and they know what that feels like. And a lot of them will confess that the flus that they get now are not the same. They don't start in the same way. They're unusual in their progression. The symptoms are very unusual. It either starts with a headache. Previously, you had a sore throat and it developed into a fever. Nowadays, it starts somewhat unusually. With a lot of patients, there's gastrointestinal symptoms that come on 2 or 3 days later from swallowing the virus in your throat and infects your gut. And then you have issues with that. Ask around. You'd find a lot of people who've had flus all their lives and really got over it relatively quickly are taking a long time to get over the flu now. You'd hear people saying it took them 2 months to get over the last flu, which is unusual. That is an immune response that has caused a reset, and it took a while for it to rebalance itself. So you stayed unwell for 2 months. You can, when you speak to patients as well, there are a lot of other unusual things that they're noticing. Omicron is neurotropic. So over time, you're going to have some neurologic issues. And so I just ask patients, how many of your friends have you noticed getting absent-minded, memory is not that great, neurologic symptoms that tend to go unnoticed? And I guess if the audience asks around, they'll find that's quite prevalent in the societies that surround them. And so I think we mustn't let our guard down. By me educating my patients about what to expect, they know to come in timeously. They're looking for patterns. And that should be done by the entire medical fraternity. The problem is they try to make a medical system with one size fits all. But we're sitting with a virus where individual responses are so unique. And those two don't gel together.
Yeah, listen to what Charles said in his summary. This is the final bit I'll play for Charles. And this was his summary to the Slovakian government at the time. Here's what he said.
My testimony is derived from 4 years of investigation, during which I have gone through more than 3,000 scientific articles and more than 150,000 pages of FOIA and other government documents. I've already provided multiple legal affidavits and remain ready to testify under oath to the veracity of the evidence in support of my conclusions. My conclusions involve implications that are horrific, regardless of which scientists from which countries are ultimately responsible for creating SARS-CoV-2. I applaud your efforts there in Slovakia to investigate those crimes against humanity, and I offer my testimony on behalf of the victims of the COVID-19 pandemic and response who cannot speak for themselves. I will not stop fighting for justice for these victims, and I pray for success in your investigations to achieve that goal.
So this is an important call, and this is what we do need now, Shankar. And as I said, your case is a testament to the fact that we need people to raise awareness of this, because at the moment, many people, they want the pandemic to be behind them. They want to talk about all the remarkable successes that happened. They want to move on from the pandemic. But everything I see indicates there can be no moving on, because the implications, the infection, the immune dysregulation, the recurrent infections, the breakdown of the immunity to cause cancer, the conditions of microscarring in the heart, the finding of spike protein in the cerebral arteries of the brain. This just goes on and on. There is no way to go on without going back.
Yeah, and it comes down, Philip, to besides the medical fraternity, the general public understanding the gravity of what's occurred to them. We're here to try and fix the problem. They are the targets of the problem. So I mention to every one of my patients, I make it my duty to say that, look, when you get the flu the next time, don't just think it's the flu. You might have just been attacked by a bioweapon. And so treat it with the necessary gravity. We all get colds and flus and we just take it as, that's the reason I ended up in ICU twice, because it was just a flu. But the flu is no more a flu. It's actually likely a bioweapon that you've been infected with. And so the gravity is absolutely necessary.
You know, Shankara, as we come to the close now, at the moment, we have almost 1,300 people on the live with us who are listening. Many of them are just members of the public who have listened, who support you, who have followed you, and they just want direction. Now, we have a specific call to the clinical community, which is a separate issue. But for this general public who is just there, who wants answers, who wants something that they can do, is there any advice that you would give them, whether or not it's for their own personal health, or whether or not it's how they challenge their governments or their health authorities? What is it that they can do?
I think, first of all, from a personal perspective, Philip, each one of them needs to understand the way they respond. A simple way forward would be to tell every patient that if you have a flu for longer than 10 days, so you go past the eighth day, and you're still unwell, consider that to be likely unusual viral infection, and go to a physician that knows what he's doing to get it sorted. You don't have to stay unwell for months on end. I see patients with this kind of immune dysregulation, and I'm able to reverse that reconstitution in a very timeous manner, and patients are back to normal. But remember, these are circulating viruses, and you'll have to do it again and again. So every time you get the flu, you got to look for this immune kind of dysregulation past the eighth day. Past the eighth day. From the perspective of regulatory authorities and the rest, I think people need to come together. We've had too much of a top-down system of governance. Uh, if I look at the world around us, Philip, and South Africa being a test bed for a lot of what's transpired, we years ago built communities where we lived in safety. The communities might have had similar ethnicities and being separated. But with this global drive for what they call democracy or equality, we've had the invasion of cultures, the invasion of communities. And so, well, with the open border policies in the UK, we can see all this dilution of culture and community. And that's left us as individuals to defend ourselves. And so we need to form groups and communities to put pressure on governments so that they do the right thing. They recognize the threat, they acknowledge the research that's gone on, and we elect leaders that are willing to do the right thing, to actually reverse what's transpired. We've had 5 years, Philip, of human rights violations, of a whole lot of new regulations that were wholly unnecessary, all propagandized by a man made virus for an agenda. And I think as the awakening happens, people need to build community and stand up together again, rather than be fragmented and get involved in discourses that separate us. From the perspective of the medical fraternity, I think they just need to let go of what they've been told, understand that they've been misled, and start to look at the true science. And again, as medical fraternity, come together as communities. We can't have the medical associations, which actually have a global network, dictate what we do for patients. That's going to be the end of allopathic medicine as we know it. But it has its benefits. So it's time to, I think, embrace and build community, be it from the perspective of patients or the perspective of the medical fraternity.
Excellent, Shankara, as usual. Well explained, thought through. Appreciate your input. Thank you again for joining us. We are going to be supporting you in the fight ahead, and let us hope that it causes a reawakening of the scientific and medical community to try and figure out how we mitigate this huge global population disaster. Still big challenges ahead. Thank you again, Shankara. Just wait with me again until we've had the outro. Thank you, everyone, for being with us, and we'll keep you updated with the best of the science. Have a great evening.
Thanks, Philip.